My name is Jane Dutton. I'm one of the faculty involved in the Center for Positive Organizations. And it's great to be back on the PosLinks stage. This is one of my favorite activities that the center helps to put on. I just want to say, for those of you who have not been to Center for Positive Organizations events, the center is meant to be, one of the images that I love about it is thinking about it as a beacon or a lighthouse, beaming out light and wisdom and knowledge and inspiration about how to build great places to work, or workplaces in which people truly thrive, where they perform well, but they also become healthier and better versions of themselves. Speaking of better versions of yourself, I just want to, as this thing sort of moves through, I just want to remind you to come to the next Positive Link series that Bob Quinn is going to be putting on. And I think it says something like becoming a better version of yourself. For those of you who have not seen Bob Quinn in action, do not miss it. He's really wonderful. And the great thing is for those of you coming to his PosLinks talk, he is offering a workshop after that for people who want to dig in a little bit deeper. So the only way you can get to the workshop is to come to the PosLinks session before. I also want to thank our sponsors for the PosLinks events. Paul and Diane Jones have been longtime supporters of this series, which we really appreciate. But what's also wonderful is we have several centers and institutes at the Ross School that are also supporting this effort. We have the Tauber Institute for Global Operations, the Zell-Lurie Institute, and the Sanger Leadership Center. So again, my appreciation goes out to all of those sponsors, because we couldn't do it without them. I'm just going to be on here very briefly because I'm going to introduce my wonderful colleague, Michael Gordon, who's a faculty colleague at Ross, who also has his office just down a couple of doors from mine, so I get to see him often, which is wonderful. But we've also taught together as a part of MAP, and he's going to talk about that's part of why we have our wonderful speaker today. But Michael Gordon, I'm so appreciative that he's stepped up to be the faculty director for the Center for Social Impact, which is doing such important work at Ross and around the world. So I'm going to ask you, Michael, to come on up and introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Jane. It's a real privilege and a real thrill to be introducing our speaker today. As Jane mentioned, I direct the Center for Social Impact, and that means that in my capacity, I really do travel around the world, both in the United States and many other countries, and find and study some amazing organizations who are creating societal good. There's an organization called People Improvement Organization that works in Cambodia, and I came in contact with them a little over a year ago and started a conversation to see if not we, the Center for Social Impact, but we, Ross, could begin to involve PIO in our work here. So it turned out, over a course of several months, I started talking with Evelina Fredriksson, who is helping this wonderful organization, which she's going to talk about. Evelina, in addition to being someone who has a heart a mile wide and a canyon deep, is also a wonderful person in the HR field. She has founded an organization called Lumen Behavior. She has been instrumental in helping kids who are legacy victims of the Khmer Rouge lead better lives. And I've had the privilege of having her come to my class and do a little bit of work for me when she gave a lecture the other night. So I know that she brings beautiful photos and lots of passion for what she's going to do. So if you join me in giving a round of applause to Evelina Fredriksson, please. Thank you. Mm-hmm. It's on.
Okay, thank you for that and for a beautiful introduction. And thank you all for coming here today. I'm so excited, and I just want to make this presentation really quick so that I will have time for for your input, but I guess I will struggle with that a little bit. Let me see. The contribution that I want to make is to bring forward knowledge about people and their context so that executives can make the right decisions. I do that in my role at PAO. PAO is an organization, a non-profit group that provides education, nutrition programs, and shelter to some of the most marginalized and poor children of Cambodia. Every day we support around 1,300 students and help them to break the cycle of poverty. I teach at the Paññāsāstra University of Cambodia and Zaman University, Cambodia. I am the co-author of Srei, Tales of Urban Girlhood. I have the book here if you want to have a look later. And I'm the CEO of Lumen Behavior, and we do research for a brighter future with mainly Swedish clients. And I'm also involved in something called Inter-Business Initiative that helps companies transcend sustainability. So today I'm going to focus on education in Cambodia. Cambodia is a country where the economy is growing rapidly. The poverty rates are decreasing very fast. But at the same time, we have 70% of the population who do not have access to piped water. Most children do enroll in primary education, but the dropout rates are fairly high still. To educate a child in Cambodia is expensive. They do not have school fees, but you have to pay for extra classes in English to make sure that you pass the exams. You have to pay for transportation, school uniforms, and so on. So we made an estimate that sending one child to school, that is about 20% of an average family income. So you can imagine what happens if you have 2 children or even more than that. Cambodia also has a very dramatic past. The founder of PAO is Phimyan Noon, and when she was 4 years old, everyone's life in Cambodia changed dramatically as Khmer Rouge seized power. They emptied all the cities of Cambodia, took people out in the countryside, and altogether, they killed around 25% of the population. They targeted educated people, and they closed every school in Cambodia. So Phimyan, who managed to survive through the horror regime, she started to dream about getting an education herself in a country where schools were turned into torture chambers and teachers were killed everywhere. As Cambodia got more stable, Phimyan managed to get some education for herself. She took care of her niece, and she also managed to get a job within the UN. So things had gotten much better for her in every sense. But one day she has this beautiful story about how she just went to sit outdoors and eat some chicken. And as she finished, she threw the chicken bones away, and out of nowhere, 5 kids just threw themselves on the chicken bones and starting to eat the things that she's thrown away. And she was horrified by this and asked the kids to come and talk to her, offer them fresh food. And they told her the story about how they came from the countryside, living in small villages, and how they had gone to the city with their parents so that the parents would find jobs and so that the kids could go to school. But as they came to Phnom Penh, they realized that there were no work at all for the parents. So the only thing they had left to do was to walk around the streets and go to the dump sites to find things that other people had thrown away, that they could eat or sell. So children were working under the sunshine on the dump site, collecting pieces of plastic, cans, bottles, just anything that they could find of any value. And the dump sites, this is a recent photo from the new dump site, and the previous one was even bigger than this and had many more people working on it. How it works is that the child is equipped with a small hook like this and walks around and moves the garbage around to find things of value. When a truck comes to bring the new garbage, what normally happens is that mainly the boys who are more ready to take the risk, they run towards the truck and just to be able to get like the fresh garbage that is more valuable. And that is of course extremely dangerous because children are small and the truck drivers can't always see them. So accidents are very frequent, and also as the garbage fall off the truck, kids risk to getting hit by it. And when they have collected the plastic, they wash it, they sell it to someone who washes it, as you can see in the tab here. And then they hang it to dry. So this is like one step up the value chain from the dump site, how they dry the plastic before they sell it. What happens during the rainy season is that the dump sites are even more dangerous because of the water. And it looks something like this, and then the plastic starts moving around because of the wind. And when a lot of bottles and small plastic items are floating on top of this water, there's no way for the children to see if it's solid ground or if it's a hole with water. So if a kid steps on this and no one sees it, that could be the end of that story. PIO's success factor was to involve the children and the caregivers in a design stage. So based on this first conversation with the children eating the chicken bones, Pimian went to the dump site, engaged with the children, with the caregivers, and understood something about their reality and what she would have to do to help them. And that was to build a school right there on the dump site. The first thing she did was to put up some kind of protection from the sun. The second thing was to arrange for drinking water. And much later, they started to worry about something to sit on or walls and things like that. So she started off with 25 kids on the first day, right on the dump site, because the kids still had to work there. The parents could not afford any transportation for them. And I think this is a beautiful example of how, if Pimian would have talked to teachers, or if she would have asked herself what would be like the most comfortable environment to work in, that wouldn't have been this place, with flies everywhere, chemicals, and the bad smell from the dump site. Stray Tales of Urban Girlhood is a study based on 120 interviews with girls and women in Phnom Penh. And that is a study in how empathy and mindful engagement give us access to key information so that we can build things with real impact and positive effects on the society and on our own organizations. Empathy is the ability to place yourself in the shoes of someone else. It's not necessarily an emotional expression. It can be a skill. Empathy can be learned. And business leaders and other decision makers who learn this skill, they are better equipped to embrace the challenges that lays ahead. And the purpose of an empathic encounter is to provide a foundation for a better decision. And most decisions that are impactful are made very far away from the girls interviewed in Stray. And those girls that we interviewed, they literally live in garbage. So they have nothing to gain from providing status quo. They will provide you with new information and a different perspective than you can find by yourself. They hold information about risks that we cannot see living in a protected environment. Stray is a priceless source of information for the business leaders of tomorrow. Children do not have the information about a business decision, but they do know more than we know about the risks, what happens when things go wrong. And the image, as we all imagine now, the girl child walking around on the dump site, risking to drown in garbage or getting hit by a truck, it's a very powerful image, and it stirs up a lot of emotions. And I'm sure everyone who thinks about this has some kind of impulse that they want to do something, they want to change something. And something that I think we struggle with is the impulse to be the rescuer, to save this girl and bring her into her own spotless everyday life. But we have to accept that those challenges are so large that no isolated rescue effort can do anything about it. It's a system, and like my child just had his birthday and Christmas is coming up, and of course it would be lovely if everyone had the opportunity to open gifts in a very safe environment. But this is information about a system where that is not the reality. Some children fall asleep before they have opened every gift, and other kids are drowning in garbage, and that is interconnected. And by being mindful about who isn't heard, and by doing empathic engagement, doing empathic interviews with people far away from power, we can learn things we need to change this. And I'm not saying that everyone should be out on the dump site conducting interviews with girls, but there are ways of accessing that information. I would like to share an example with 3 insights that I made from working on those interviews. So this is the story about Sreinam, a mother living in Phnom Penh. I met her little sister first. I was in a slum area called Borekela, and I just saw her. And for us here, this doesn't look, this looks like a kind of a normal way of dressing, but in that area, this is very obvious that she is working in a bar, because they are always dressed like this. And she is only 16 when this picture is taken. So working in that kind of bar is a very dangerous profession, and it's also a very shameful profession. So I started to talk to her and asked her if she wanted to tell me more about herself, and she invited me to her home. Her home is in a building that is half taken down, because this area is being gentrified, so all of the old buildings are blown up and they're building new things, but they are still staying in this building that doesn't have all the walls intact or anything. And her parents, they were sick. They were at home that day because they were sick, and there were lots of cats looming around, and the environment wasn't what I would have chosen as a good meeting room, but that was the place that she chose. And she was going to talk about her work in this bar, this shameful profession of hers, and her father was sitting next to her. And normally I would think that that might have been a problem, but in the situation it was so obvious that he was supportive of her. He wanted to give her this space. He understood that I was interested in her story, and because he sat there and also listened to her and supported her, she could share her story. I met her many times. She stopped working at the bar because her parents moved to another province and started to work on a construction site, so they could send money back to the siblings who stayed there. And I wanted to know what it had been like when they first came to Phnom Penh. They came from a village into the city, and I started to ask about that, but she didn't remember because she was only 16, and the other ones, they were hardly born then. And then they told me that they have a sister who is 23, so she must remember. But they didn't have a way of contacting her because they didn't have a phone. And that is extremely unusual, but they didn't have a phone. So I got her a phone. I just bought a cheap phone, $10, and I think the way they could use it to talk to their parents, but also to make the introduction to this sister, was really helpful for them, but it was also like a way of moving forward, like solving the small problems that comes up when you actually want to know more, and just being a little bit hands-on on finding a solution. So then I met Sreenam, and she did remember how it was in Phnom Penh when they first came there. She showed me a huge scar on her arm that she gotten when she was a child collecting cans, and there was a group of older boys that wanted her cans. And the only thing she did, they came up to her and told her to give the cans, and her grip along the sack tightened a little bit, and when they saw that, they stabbed her with a knife in the arm and took the cans. So that was how she grew up on the streets. She met a motor-tuk driver, like a kind of a taxi driver that drives a motorbike to transport people, and had 2 children with him. He was a very abusive man, and she was living in a horrible situation where he was beating her basically every day. Her children were small. One of them was a baby, and the other one was just 2 years old. They were living in this huge, it looks like a parking lot, but it's actually a space for weddings. You rent tents and put them up in this place when it's time for weddings. When I was there, it was not the wedding season, so it was just like a huge empty space. And I will forever be so grateful for my translator, who could navigate this conversation with her, who could understand her accent, her way of expressing herself. And together we could also figure out a way when she started to talk about her husband, and he was there, and figure out a way to say that, oh, can you please show us around this big empty space? I'm dying to see this big empty space. And we could start to walk, and she could tell us more and more. And what she told us that was a very, very powerful story about how she decided that her children would never have to remember what their father was doing to them. So she would give them away to an organization. She would leave them without telling her husband, and she would never tell him where to find them, just to make sure that they would never see any of the things that he did. And I'm also a mother. This is extremely emotional for me, and of course there's an impulse to say, like, I want to fix this, I want to solve this, I want to do something about your situation. But that is not what empathy is about. It is about listening to her story and understand that her problems are big and complex, and I cannot solve them like that. It's much bigger than that. And what I need for my own emotional reaction, I have to keep that somewhere else. So that evening I was looking at this picture, I was writing about what I felt and reflecting on what I felt. But I didn't tell her how to fix her situation or tell her how to be a mother, because she is the best mother for her children. During this time, all those interviews, We often get the questions, how do we know that the people are not lying to you? And we do not know that. But I still believe strongly that empathy gives us access to information in every interaction. And I have a story that I always share with my Cambodian students, and they always laugh about this. But if I go riverside in Cambodia and I meet a teenager who tells me that she needs $10 for school fees, then I have 3 different ways of reacting to that. I could just give her $10 for school fees, or I can think that like, oh, I know that you don't have school fees, you're lying to me, so this is just a lie. Or I could actually listen to her and think about like, why is she asking me for $10? That is still information. Even if it's not true that they have school fees, it's still valuable information in this interaction. The map project that we did, this was one of the most encouraging parts of my work with PIO, and such an amazing example of how people can contribute to a good cause. I think the success factors was we had good preparations and the right expectations about the project. The focus was on contribution, and I keep saying how impressed I was the first time I met on Skype with the MAP team. And I have so many visitors that always ask the same practical questions and about logistics and so on. They didn't ask any of that they just wanted to know, how can we help? What would be our best contribution? And then they stick with that throughout the project. We arranged a field visit, a short one. They were with us for 1 week. And we tried to make sure that they met children at all 3 different schools. They got to see different parts of our operations, but also other parts of Phnom Penh, to give a balanced impression and to give a wider perspective. And all the students that came and did the MAP projects, they also connected in a very authentic way to the people they met there. And they used their expertise and their own skill set to make a valuable contribution to PIO. And they were also, I was also so moved when I understood that they also felt that this was impactful for them, and that they also learned new things and made new insights from this. So what we believe in is that we can forge authentic connections for genuine contributions. So the other part of my work that I do at Paññāsāstra and Zaman, when I teach 3 different courses, journalistic principles and ethics, academic research and information literacy, and non-state actors in global politics. The students who I work with there, they are taking a very big step. They come from a system where they learned by memorizing, repeating what the teacher is saying, and not at all by exploring. And for me, I'm from Sweden, and when we learned how to write ABC, we did it with water on a blackboard so that we would see that any mistake we make, it will disappear when it dries, and we will have to keep repeating it. So it's a very creative and positive environment, and probably the opposite of what they go through. That is very hierarchical system, and the learning environments are very focused on like, don't make any mistakes. And if you make a mistake, that is really bad. And that is related to severe problems with plagiarisms and poor performance. We have a lot of stress, lowered self-esteem. lot of students that don't sleep properly because they are so stressed out about, like they try to navigate how to learn anything in this new context. So we started together to experiment with a lot of different things to do something about this learning environment. So we started the What Went Well exercise. So every day I started the class by asking the students to talk amongst themselves and to share with me something that went well. I shared things myself. We did the Via Character Strength Finder, and we worked on how to use an active, constructive, responsive style. So when we explain, like, why did something go well, then we try to connect it to the strength. We try to really ask questions about that and infuse some positivity into the classroom, and also to just boost the students by looking at their strength. And one of the universities where I work, it's called Zaman University. Suk Udom, who is the rector there, he was also very excited about this character strength exercise. So we got research permission from the VIA Institute, and we are now collecting data and going to write something about how we can use this in education. And then I worked very hard on cultivating a culture that is responsibility, and where students actually see that they have chosen to come to school to learn something. It's not just buying a degree. I did that in many different ways, but one thing that I actually think was effective was that I noticed that I got so many emails saying, "I'm sorry, teacher." It was like, "I'm sorry I didn't attend class, I'm sorry I didn't give you the paper on time." And I just asked him to, like, never say "I'm sorry." Like, we forbid that word, but you say what you want to mean. Like, what do you mean? Maybe you want to say, "I'm sorry," because you want to express that you do respect me as a person and that I spent time on this. I guess you can say that in some other way. You can just ask me, "How are you?" Maybe that is good enough. And then you can explain what you think we could do about this. Can we solve it somehow? And like, spend more time on those emails, and then it will be fine, and we don't have to say "I'm sorry" at all. And I also asked them to tell me what grade they should have and why. And they were very surprised by this, but it worked very well. They put a lot of effort in explaining why they should have a certain grade, and they aimed pretty high, most of them. We talked about grit, like almost every day, and I was showing this picture over and over again and try to talk about what is the meaning of effort. And effort counts twice. It's your talent and effort, and then it's your skill and effort that leads to achievement. And then I also really had to draw on my strength to provide good feedback to them. Instead of just providing a grade, really going into their work and finding a way to give them something that was valuable, and always keep with me that everyone is learning and growing, and that we can cultivate a growth mindset within this group. And then we also celebrated. To celebrate learning, I think that was one of the most important things that we did. Like, the last day of every course, we did something special, and this was maybe it's my favorite group, journalist students. So we had a pool party for the last day, just to really celebrate that we are all developing and making progress. And the same principles, it's something that I see everywhere. We have so much to gain by challenging how knowledge is found and how knowledge is shared. And empathy and mindful engagement can give us access to key information in so many different situations. This picture is from a youth institution in Sweden. It's a place that is located very remotely, and the boys there, they have done things like armed robbery, kidnappings, like really serious offenses. And they are placed here in this institution. And I went there to do interviews with them. And the first thing that they said was like, oh, we have baked today. Like, please have some brownie. And then the first topics they wanted to bring up was all related to cooking and nutrition and how excited they were about learning how to take better care of themselves. So in this institution, they have really managed to cultivate a growth mindset. Like, we will all be better by feeling better, thinking about well-being in a holistic way, and then we will be able to access education or maintain a work later on in life. So we've been measuring well-being in those institutions using the PERMA profiler, and this is the 5th year that we are doing that, and we can really, in this specific place, we can really see an increase in well-being, and in other places we see less of an increase, but we can still see the same patterns and the same factors that really makes a difference. And this company who assigned us to do this, they are so interesting, because what they want to do is to keep the numbers describing well-being next to the financial numbers and look at those two in every decision. So what we can draw on all this is that systematic dialogues, to going outside of the normal room where we normally have the conversations about decisions, can lead to a much better future for Srey at the dump site, but also for all of us in here. Thank you. I would love to have your questions and input and whatever you feel like saying, because I know there's so many. So now there's so many interesting people in this room, so I just want to hear what you have to say.
I'll start.
Yeah, please, Jane.
So how do you stay centered and resilient and optimistic? How do you, as a teacher, but also as a change agent, sustain yourself in the face of the kind of work that you're doing?
To me, it's so much about authentic connection, to connect to people, the people that I meet. And as we discussed on Monday in the lunch seminar, that by doing the interviews in a way that really lets me see the same things that the girl is thinking about, like ask about the details, like really be there with her when she is telling the story, that is also something that gives me a sense of connection and meaning and makes it possible for me to feel energized by this work.
So one of the ways that I understand empathy is that, one can see a situation and understand that people are in pain and then do nothing. Yeah. Or secondly, that you can see a situation, see there's, again, an uncomfortable situation, and just become so despairing that even though you want to do something, you don't do something.
Yeah.
And yet you're describing this middle ground, and I thought your story was, I've heard you tell this story a couple times now, and I'm moved, I'm struck by it, but I'm just curious, is there a wide range of options that went through your head from I have to respect this woman, nothing more, nothing less. But were there possibly other things that were appropriate in that context? Maybe I could advise her in this way, help her that way, in this way. I'd just love to hear you talk about that for a second.
Yeah, and that is, of course, extremely tempting to advise her. And I'm sure there are plenty of people that could have provided her with very good advice, but it's also to see, like, what is my limitation? Like, I am not fit to do that. I do not know any better solution to this. And then what happened later on was that she found out that my translator used to run a vocational training program that was about, they call it dressmaking program, so they learn how to sew. And then this woman had masses of questions to my translator about how can one get a sewing machine? Is there a possibility there? And I believe that that was a much more relevant dialogue for her to have than to talk to me that would have said like, oh no, you shouldn't leave your kids, you should. So when she could be a change agent in her own life, to have that space, to not being, like if I would have gone in there and advised her, she wouldn't have the confidence to start to talk to the translator, and that conversation was much more valuable. Thank you for a good question. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm AJ. I'm a student in the College of Engineering, and I just want to say first off, this is an amazing presentation. I actually just came from backpacking in Cambodia. I was there for about a month, living mostly with indigenous tribes, and I had this kind of experience mostly for the reasons that you described, really trying to understand like how people live, why they live that way, and the practices and culture that comes along with that. And I guess what I was interested in hearing a little bit more from you about is what you see as our role in all of this. Because something that I struggled a lot with when I was backpacking throughout, Chipat and living with the Benung people in the Malakuri province as well. And I was like literally always going into schools. I was physically like sleeping wherever they slept, and like just adopting completely their lifestyle. And in particular, there's a story just to share real quick. When I was on a jungle trek in Chipat, which for people who aren't familiar, it's an ecotourism project in the southwest corner of Cambodia. I was in this community that essentially was, how do I explain? I guess there was one man who I was on the trek with, who was our guide, who was the breadwinner for the entire village. So he was literally the bringing in money to support his entire family, his friends' families, and everyone all together. And we were about 20 kilometers into the jungle, killing our own food and preparing it. And I remember we were cooking, and I asked him at one point, how could I help? Like what do you guys want from someone like me who's coming in with all this opportunity and all this privilege? Like what can we do to help? And his answer, I asked him, was like, would you want to come to America? If we could bring you to America, would you want to? And he said, no. I don't want to go move to your country. I want to stay here. And his answer really shocked me. And so sorry for the long, tangent here, but the idea is just like, what do you see our role as? Because I think there's this savior complex that you talked about that I was really confounded by when I was there. And I wanted to get your perspective on that. Do you what do we do about all this? How do we contribute from where we are now?
Yeah, but I can totally relate to what you are saying, and how I do feel things like that. Can I please just do something about this and make sure that this person gets something that is much more similar to the things that I have? And the key there is to, if we are really in tune with other people, then we realize that they are literally exactly the same as us. They also have families, and if I say oh, I want to save this girl and take her to my home, that would be wrong because she has a family, she has a context, and to be respectful towards her context is not that difficult if I think about myself and my context. Like I have people who are really close to me and other people who are not as close to me. And the same principles apply for every human being. And yeah, at the same time, so I also feel things that are, like it stirs up a lot of emotions to see people in hard situations.
It does, but I guess my question was like, what do you see our role as in all this? Because it's one thing to feel empathy, it's another thing to take action.
Yeah.
I feel like the action needs to be taken, but it's hard for someone in our position, where we are here, to know what to do about it.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, my contribution would be to bring forward the knowledge about this, about the situation, about the context, and about the way to approach the issues. And the change that I would make would not necessarily be only for this particular person that I'm meeting. Like I might not help every individual that I meet, but I think that I can make a very small but still a contribution to a more systematic change by bringing forward this knowledge and by having these kind of conversations with people like you that will also be part of this system from here. Thank you.
First of all, thanks for the wonderful lecture. And then, so I've noticed that there are like I can feel like there are two major groups in your presentation. One is in Cambodia. One is the group that are struggling, that are in the garbage dumps and try to facing a lot of domestic violence problem. And the other group who is trying to, who are in the middle class, they have a relatively better welfare, and then they're trying to improve their learning. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you incorporate like the idea of empathy in your teaching for the students, and how do you help those like relatively well-to-do students who are in university to I mean, like, share your thoughts on the idea of inequality in the Cambodia, and like how do you encourage students to think harder about it? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So if I understood your question correctly, like those two different universities are very different.
No, I mean like the students who are in maybe in PIO schools, like students in students in working class families, or like students working near garbage. I mean, like children working near garbage dump, and then like your students who are in universities, for example. So I mean, like those two major groups.
Yeah, yeah.
So
yeah, that would be, yeah. And for me, like I don't work directly with the children in the PIO school. I've done the interviews and I talk to them a lot, but I don't teach. And
I mean, how do you teach your students in universities about their situation in their own country? And then, like, how do you, I mean, like, you have talked a lot about this concept of empathy and trying to understand from their situation, like, how do you teach in your classes? That's
and then I would say that those two universities, because one of them is a university that is very expensive to attend. So some of those students, they were actually not aware about this kind of poverty. So I arranged a number of field visits for them. So we went and saw those things that we seen in the pictures, and several of them told me afterwards that we were not aware. We have not seen this before. Of course, they know it because they read it and they understand the economy of their country because they have many books and they have plenty of time to study, but they didn't really see it. But at the other university, many of the students there, they come from similar conditions, so they are more aware than I am. But I think empathy in the classroom can be much more than that as well. Just being like cultivating a positive culture in the classroom where you help your classmates evolve and you give each other good feedback and things like that is also related to empathy. So I think it could be like pretty much everything good you can do in a classroom.
You said empathy is a skill, not an emotional expression. Do you have advice for us to grow our own capabilities for empathy? So some advice and suggestions for more mindful engagement in the day-to-day?
Cool. A super hands-on advice would be to practice to listen to someone's story without advising that person. And that, I think that could be as simple as when someone tells you, like, I'm really sad about this and this and this, like, not to go straight to fix it. And that we can all do that in our life. And like, for me, it's so easy to practice this with my 6-year-old, that when he is really sad and upset, and if I say, like, oh, I hear that you are really sad, then he's fine. If I say, like, oh no, that's nothing to worry about, and that's not a big deal, and we can buy a new one, or something like that, then he will keep being sad for a really long time. So just by practicing that, like sitting with other people's emotions, will make us better equipped to do that. Thank you for a good question.
So I don't know about longevity, incidence of chronic illness, child survival rates, but I would guess they're low. In our country, it would be unacceptably low. So I know a situation where, for a period of time, it doesn't exist anymore, individuals, mainly Native Americans, living in mud huts, hogans, tents, literally, in their families, without running water, where children were taken out of the home, put in a middle-class home in another state to get education, went back in the summer to live with their parents, but they were, and the families with whom they lived, well, volunteered. It was all just without any kind of money exchange. The intent was, let's try to create an educated populace who can go back and lift their culture or better their circumstances. What do you think about that sort of system with these people working in garbage? Is that unethical, immoral, inappropriate? Should we just empathize and understand, or should there be some action? What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think there should be action, and that is very common, of course, in Cambodia, that children live with other relatives, and that is already the case when they come and work at the dump site. Might be that they come there with the grandmother and the parents are back in the province. So we do support them with shelter. It's a very small shelter. We have about 70 kids staying in the shelter. But that could be a much better solution for them than to stay with the grandmothers. And it could also be a way for them to actually strengthen their relationships to the families if it's done correctly. So I don't believe it's always unethical. I think there's always ways to move forward and to do things, as long as you really make sure that people are engaged in it, that you don't decide anything without talking to all the adults and the children involved. And we have beautiful stories about how children were sent back home to their parents, and they did a hunger strike. Those two girls, they refused to eat for 3 days unless the parents sent them back to PIO, because that is the school they wanted to go to. And yeah, the parents gave up and sent them back.
I think it's time for us to stand up and to begin the thank yous to Evelina for coming all this way and sharing your story. Love to hear you. Oh. I got it, sorry. We're going to do a series of thank yous to Evelina because she was coming here for the pause links and we put her to work all week that she's here, and we're so grateful to her. So I'm going to let Michael start, and then I will do something on behalf of the center.
Well, this has been a long time in the making, and I'm so delighted through all these conversations and the MAP team working with you that we were able to get you here. And what you've told me and what other people who have met with you told me, it's been a lot of fun and a lot of good things happening. So thank you so much for coming. This is just a small token. We're going to load you up with reading material.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank the members of the MAP team that are here, because we've said to Evelina, they did such a great job of influencing us about the importance of having Evelina come and become more connected to Ross, and I can now see why much more. And we love artifacts in the Center for Positive Organizations. This is an artifact that is meant to convey positive spirals or generative dynamics, life-giving dynamics in human communities. So we hope it'll remind you of your visit here and all the wonderful work you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
And I think Evelina was kind enough to say she would wait around if people wanted to. I know you had a question. Please, I don't encourage you to come and have a conversation.
Yeah, I will be here if anyone